Recognized, Uncle Walker, D01. Recognized, Going in Blind, D18. Initiate Part 1.
Today in the cave we have an example of the wonder of living in the future. The brilliant and charismatic Morgan Jenkins is coming to us from Australia, host of the Going in Blind podcast. Going in Blind is a Dungeons & Dragons actual play podcast whose players are visually impaired. Morgan has guested on such industry podcasts as the Dungeon Master's Block and DM-Nastics, discussing the art of storytelling using rich, detailed, and emotionally poignant description. Morgan also happens to be a new fan to Young Justice. Morgan, honored to welcome you to the cave, man.
Honored to be here, and completely terrified and excited and ecstatic. I would say very much, having once been whelmed, I can say I am overwhelmed.
All right. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that our discussion episodes draw on anything and everything related to Young Justice, including both seasons of the series so far, the comics, and the video game. If you have not seen, read, or played all of the material and are spoiler wary, please consider this your warning. And with all that, let's dive in. So I touched on a few things in the intro, Morgan, but tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do in the world.
Who I am is of no importance. What I do is slightly more interesting, I think. I've worked with Vision Australia Radio for a number of years, just doing odd projects for them. And because I love Dungeons and Dragons and I love combining things that I love in strange ways no one else would, I thought, wouldn't it be great to take Dungeons and Dragons and make it accessible to people who are vision impaired? Because that requires very little work. And I love doing very little work. Unfortunately, I then thought, wouldn't it be great to record those and edit them and turn them into an interesting story-driven podcast? That requires a lot of editing, which is a lot of work. But it's a lot of fun, and we've had a bunch of players now come in and play, some recorded, some not, and some people can hear on Going in Blind, some you won't yet, but when I get around to editing them, you will. We've got more episodes coming out this year, which is exciting, because we've had a bit of a break, unfortunately, just due to illnesses within families and people having commitments elsewhere. It kind of pulled us all apart, but we're back together and we're back to it. And it's basically just a group storytelling adventure. It's a D&D Let's Play, and it's been a lot of fun and has really changed how I DM as well.
Yeah, I'm going to get into that a little bit later, too, about how the environmental pressures, so to speak, have you focus on different kinds of skills of storytelling and writing, both, really. But I hinted at it in the intro. When did you first see Young Justice? And what inspired you to watch the show?
So I first saw Young Justice, I want to say, a few weeks back now.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm quite new to the series. And what inspired me, the way I saw it was very, I think, emblematic of a deeper problem with Young Justice, in that it is a good show. How dare they? So I sat down to watch one episode. I swear, just one, and then I'm going to bed because I have a work at 6 a.m. 16 episodes later, I was in a bit of trouble. And then I came back the next day and went through I'll just finish season 1. That's all I'll do. Oh, maybe I'll watch the first episode of season 2. Oh no, half of season 2 is gone. So in the course of about 3 days, I'd gone through the entire series, then discovered from Neil from DM-Nastics and now Dungeon Master's Block that there was the video game, and so I found that and went through that as well. And I'm hoping to get my hands on some of the comics soon. But what inspired me to actually get into it, I am pleased to say, it was you. And it was you before you did Whelmed. It was actually, I can't remember where the conversation happened, whether it was in a podcast I was listening to or in one of the Facebook groups we're attached to. But somewhere you were trying really hard not to be a super fan of Young Justice and failing. And so I
that doesn't sound like me at all. I don't know what you're talking about.
You're like, I'm gonna be brief. I'm gonna mention it maybe 20 times. It's fine. Shush. It's all good. And so I ended up going, well, this is something I have to put on my list. And then more and more people that I trust when they talk about shows that are good or bad or why, it kept coming up and kept coming up. And I thought, all right, well, no, it was on my to watch list, but I'll shift it up and put it right up the top there. And I'm very glad that I did, and also very sad, because it's one of about 4 things that have been able to make me cry while watching them. So,
yeah.
which is always a good test of a TV show, if it can make you feel feelings. How dare they?
Yeah, exactly. I think that was the original title of this episode, was how to get Morgan to feel things and then destroy him. I think something like that. Is that what we were brainstorming?
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was your experience with DC, like DC and comics in general, before you started watching the show? Like, do you have a comics background, or were these characters all new to you?
Oh, no, not all of these characters were new to me. Certainly some of them were. But my very first, going far, far, far back into the distant past of the 90s, ugh, that hurts. There's a time travel show on at the moment, and they keep going back into the past to the 90s, and it makes me sad inside, because I get all of the cultural references. But I grew up watching Lois and Clark.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course.
And that was my introduction. Before even watching the Superman films, that was my introduction to what Superman is and what this world is. And then, of course, Batman, the animated series, though the airing time in Australia for that was weird and they did it out of order. So
okay,
it's also on my list of things to go back and rewatch to actually get it as a whole story, as it were. And other than that, the TV shows now, unfortunately, getting into comics is incredibly difficult to know where those jumping off points can be. And to that end, I've listened to a number of podcasts about comics and about the creators of comics, hoping that someone somewhere will say, here's a great way to get into this series that you might be interested in. And torturing all my friends to try and find those jumping in points. And of course, trying to have money for comics because they cost money.
Yeah, I hear you.
And as difficult as that is, at the end of the day, it's a medium that I think great stories are being told in at the moment, and we need to support it. And so really trying to support it. But mostly at the moment, yeah, it's the TV shows, Arrow and Flash and all sort of the rest of the Berlanti-verse.
Right.
And that's kind of where I'm getting a lot of my stuff from comic-wise at the moment.
Well, that was one thing a few people have told us, is that Young Justice became a kind of an on-ramp for some of these myths, you know, these stories and ideas, which is fantastic because there's a lot going on. I mean, we've got a whole podcast. So I first heard you talking about storytelling techniques in the Going In Detailed episode of the Dungeon Masters block. And it blew my mind, man. It was absolutely fascinating because as a gamer and a comic fan, for that matter, I love bringing detailed visuals to my table. Maps, pictures of my supporting cast characters, miniatures, crazy looking dice, just whatever, right? To keep my players engaged, basically to cheat and hopefully have them think I know what I'm doing. Yet, as an author, I don't have those tools, so I'm focused on finding ways to both invoke images and or evoke emotional reactions out of my readers without using any of that. And so it's interesting to me when I was listening to you, because it's like when you're running a game for visually impaired individuals, you have to merge both this love of your gaming with the improv skills, and those improv skills with the descriptive verbal writing skills in a way that I've never really used. So can you tell us a little bit more about Going In Blind, like how that started a little bit and kind of that aspect of the skills you have to use?
Okay, yep. Well, I found my DM style was not that going into the game. And certainly going back and listening to some of those earlier episodes and listening to how much editing had to be done to make it a functional story. I'm not ashamed to say there was a moment when I lifted up a book and said, the town looks like this. And Kat just sat there for a moment waiting for me to realize what I'd done. And she's sort of going, that is just a blob across the table. What are you doing?
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, yeah, no, I'm so sorry. I'm a monster. I'm terrible. What have I done? And she just laughed and threw something. I think one of the big sort of foam die we have. And so it became this way of choosing moments that were important and finding things that were thematically important and important to me and important to the story that we were telling, and just finding different ways of showing that. So if you were to have a major plot point, whether it be a villain or whether it be the big bad's room or what have you, you're going to have a representation of that. Now, for a lot of tables, that is bringing out Tiamat and putting it on the table. For other games, it's, like you say, bringing out those bits of paper and saying, hey, here's what they look like. For me, I didn't have that. And so it became about using other ways to draw those connections and then learning that I could extrapolate that out into other aspects of writing. So it became about finding those points of connection to the places that I thought were emotionally relevant. And so it would be, you've walked into this big cave and it's meant to be scary. How do I make it scary? What sounds, what smells, what kind of touch under your feet of the rocks around you? And just using all these other senses, but also using sort of descriptions of what they're seeing as well, but finding what the important things are. And it really honed my ability to look at what the emotional impact of an individual scene should be. And then what the players do within that scene, that's entirely up to them. But it's just, what is that initial emotional impact I want them to have when they walk into a scene?
Yeah.
What is the emotional impact I would like them to have coming out of that scene based on whatever direction they go in? And finding descriptions and ways to get them from point A to points B, C, or D, whichever one they choose, in a way that flows and in a way that the details are enhancing, not detracting from.
Right. Does it affect how you, either how you write now or how you even read or consume media?
It has, in that combined with just working in sort of radio editing, I'm a lot more interested in the soundscapes that people put behind and through shows, TV shows, radio shows, whatever it is I happen to be interacting with. And when reading books, looking at the way things are staged in a book, because when you place characters down on a map, you are telling a very specific story and you're unfolding it in a very specific way. You are putting people in positions of power of, if you want to draw the horrible Star Wars third episode thing, you're putting them in the place of higher ground, and therefore they have the advantage.
Thank you, Ben Kenobi.
I love that the Mythbusters then went along and said, nope, that's rubbish. That doesn't mean anything. He's just saying words. But
that's rubbish. It's the best thing. I've heard that. Sorry, derailing.
No, my train has never been on the tracks. But it's that kind of thing where I look at the placement of characters when people walk into a room or when people are interacting with each other in a space, in a story. I'm a lot more aware of that. In the past, it would be two people are talking and whatever other fluff around it is not important. I'm just paying attention to the conversation.
It's irrelevant.
And
that
was the case in TV. That was the case in movies. That was the case in books. Now, if the writer has gone to the trouble of giving me that context of where this conversation is taking place, if someone's moving around in the space or if they're standing very still, what they're picking up, what they're fiddling with, what they're doing, and using that to then feed back into how that character is feeling, because a lot of characters in good shows will say one thing and weirdly be feeling a whole collection of other things that they're not voicing.
Right.
And so using these cues to pick up on that. And one thing that I love about Young Justice is that it's not actor choice per se, it is show choice and animator choice that they do these kind of things.
Yeah, we've talked about that a ton on the show, and it's one of a few reasons I wanted to have you on the show, was because of that filter that you work with through storytelling, this unique filter and presentation, both with radio presentation and with a game at the table, even when people are present with you, and those choices that I know that I was sure you were noticing, right? The visual looks on characters' faces in the background, or the sound, the audio in the background, where the choices are made, right? But like, we started talking about having you on the show because you were live tweeting about watching Young Justice. I'm not sure if I can call it live tweeting, because basically you had blown through 16 episodes so quickly you couldn't actually tweet about them, I think. But you had said, I think you may have cursed my name, and then something about 16 episodes, and then, and then you moved on. So when I asked you, I was like, hey, you're presenting some really interesting points of view on Twitter. Do you want to come on the show? One of the things that you said that you really wanted to talk about was kind of this idea about, or we were talking earlier, about asking the right questions, getting your players and or readers and or watchers involved in the story by planting these things that aren't just exposition, telling us a story. You were feeling the story. You were taking that emotional ride. But how do you do that? And as we were talking about it, it became this focus of, we all wanted to know the answers to the questions that they were making us ask. And the question wasn't, why am I watching this garbage? It was, we'll talk about a few examples from the show, but like getting your readers pulled into your story by asking the right questions. So I wanted to start off by talking about what we mean by that, about getting your readers or players or watchers to ask the right questions. What's your view on that?
My view on that is complex, because asking the right questions to me is only half of the trouble. I mean, the main questions that I had going into season 2, and I will delve down into that very soon, but my big questions were, who is Beast Boy? Why bad guy? What? Where has he gone? What? Why? Where? Huh? And why did Megon or Conscian or Super Martian break up? Why is he being a petulant crybaby?
Right.
And make it stop? And because for me, you have these larger emotional, and the way that emotion is drawn out in Young Justice is fascinating and intriguing. But you have these larger sort of set pieces that they bring in, like the death of Artemis and the lead up to that, where they punch you in the gut with it early in an episode, then go back and pull you through the entire episode until you get to that point, and then the revelations that come after that point.
Right.
But one thing that I like, and these are moments that are, they hang on them a lot. You get a lot of flashbacks to them. You get a lot of time for the characters to be on screen absorbing these moments and discussing these moments. And I thought, what about these sort of the subtler, smaller, emotional gut punches that you get that don't hang around, that they don't hold on to, and they don't stick around with? So these tiny, tiny moments of realization that we then very quickly move on to other larger questions that are still just as big and just as important, but aren't given that screen time per se, except you get to see the ripples and ramifications of them, and they're arguably some of the more important questions. And the fact that the show is smart enough and the show has enough faith in us as viewers that they're willing to give us the answers through subtlety and context, and they're not going to just spoon feed the answers to us just because we want to know. And so I'm going to do something that I don't think anyone should ever do, and I apologize for doing it, but I'm going to compare this series, specifically the jump between season 1 and season 2, to another show called Glee.
Okay.
Which has never been done and should never be done again.
Okay.
Because
I'm fascinated.
because jumping into season 2, we start in media res, something we know they do well. There's sort of a new Robin, then a Beast Boy, and then other people turn up, but the other people aren't given as much time as this new Robin and this new Beast Boy. Then we see the haircut, which is given more time than those people, and she cut her hair. What? Then 5 years later, and we hear Nightwing. And if this were any other show, I would be worried. Now, I was confused, but not worried, because they built that story trust through season 1.
Right.
And because I was listening to you and checking in to see if season 2 was still good, and you're like, it's different, but good. I'm like, okay, I'm fine. There we go.
Yeah.
And so with that time jump, all of a sudden this happy relationship we got at the end of season 1 no longer exists. 3 minutes in, we've got Lagoon Boy and his angelfish. And so between season 1 and season 2, at the end of season 1, everyone's in a relationship, everyone's happy, everything's great, yay, hugs, go home, it's great. Start of season 2, they've broken up, and very quickly in that episode, in fact, like in Glee, the same thing happened. At the end of season 1, everyone's happy. At the start of season 2, one of the main and sweetest relationships in that season, kind of the flagship relationship for the nerdy and the outcast like myself, had broken up. And they'd broken up for the dumbest reason, and it was explained in the worst possible way, in the, hey, here's some exposition rubbish way. And if anyone here has watched Glee, it was, I can't remember their names, so I'm going to use the stereotypes, and for that I apologize, because they use the stereotypes because they're monsters and terrible writers. But it was the young Asian woman and who felt like an outcast and had dyed her hair because that's how you know she's an outcast, apparently. And the young man who is sad because he can't dance because he's in a wheelchair.
Aww.
So he has dreams about dancing in episodes directed by Joss Whedon. And
oh, sorry, I have to stop you right there. That episode where he sings Safety Dance and dances around in the mall, that was a Joss Whedon episode?
yes, that is the episode.
Is that why that's the only episode that replays automatically in my head periodically? That episode is amazing.
It was a fantastic episode. It's what actually made me sit down and watch Glee. It was directed by Joss Whedon. It had Neil Patrick Harris in it, and it had a really fantastic story done in a really interesting way, and really sweet and really bittersweet. And I then went into the rest of the series being like, maybe the rest of it will be this good. Not quite.
Yeah, you were mistaken.
Oh, and certainly when they jumped to season 2, and all of a sudden you have, oh, she's broken up with him because he's not Asian enough for her parents, and she wouldn't understand his Asianness, so she's now going out with the Asian. Was so beyond problematic that it hurt.
Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't watch enough of... I liked the first season fine, and I think we stopped watching in the second season for unrelated reasons, so no, I didn't realize that it happened.
And it was explained in such a terrible...
We try and stay positive on this show. I'm just letting you know.
But it was so painful simply in the way that, and again, there are ways that you can deliver that information that isn't terrible. And the question of why they broke up was resolved in such an awful way. And the answer itself was awful, but it was resolved in such an awful way that it just created a disconnect with the show, and I had to step away from the entire show. And so coming into season 2 here in a lovely show that's friendly and would never hurt us, sarcasm, show, are you listening? We get a very clear, they are broken up. We see that Wolf isn't happy about it. Very quickly we get some subtle FaceTime with Baby Soups, and we know that he's not cool with it. And that makes his later chat in episode 2 with Alana interesting when he's saying, I dumped her and she left me no choice.
Yeah.
But he thinks the new Atlantean is good to her and a bit of a jerk, and all of this is happening, and the only thing going through my head, the very first big question, this question, if we're talking about the right question and how to answer it, is where is this old Atlantean and why? Because we've got this new guy, and he's not the old guy, and where's the old guy? And that brings me to a really interesting one, which is Tula, and the revelations and realizations about her, which are so subtle that they're almost entirely played as background.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, like, in season 2, episode 3, Alienated, about, I want to say 10 minutes in, we get that realization that the son of Manta that we've been seeing is Calderam, and that he's gone to the bad side, and we don't know why. But the fact that they posit that question in episode 1 of where has he gone, who is, what, why has he been replaced? And they wait until the 3rd episode, which in real world, that's weeks of waiting. For me, it was about 10 minutes, but for everyone else, it was weeks of waiting to find out. So at this point...
Don't tell me about this. Oh my God.
This is why I'm always sad about people who binge things.
Yeah, my wife she loves Calder. And we got into the first handful of these episodes, and she's like, I can't watch this. What is happening right now? I can't. I'm like, just keep watching. He's not a traitor. Oh my gosh, he blew up that island.
Yeah.
And all these people were on it. I can't. We had to literally because we were binging it because she binges things. And we just had to stop. She's like, I can't. I got to take a break. She just had to stop because she couldn't handle it. Right? Not necessarily in a bad way. She needed to know why this character, who she had grown to trust and love in the first season, had done these things, right? And then when he reveals to Aquaman and the rest of us, you let Tula die. We're like, wait, the what?
Yeah.
Okay. And then why didn't you tell me? And this was my mistake, Cal. And you're like, oh my gosh, I want to see this conversation that had happened. And we get to see it. Neil was on the show telling us about the video game Legacy, where we get to see that scene. But again, these are you make a perfect point that I was going to bring up maybe a little bit later, but we can nod to now, which is this idea of knowing how to reveal things organically within the story, right? We didn't need to know all the background, and indeed, it was better to not know the background of what is happening right now. Now, I will say that there are definitely plenty of watchers of Young Justice who did not care for the time jump because it made them uncomfortable. Like, they were so, like, confused by what was happening. And I'm making a speculation here, but I think those of us who understood or knew these characters understood pretty quickly what they were doing, which is, oh, Robin is now Nightwing. Oh my gosh, they've jumped 5 years in the future. The storyline potential for this is enormous. We can immediately introduce characters like Tim without going through an entire season, right? It has us ask that question, who is this Robin in the grotto who's apparently dead? They never, ever mention Jason's name through the entire season, so you just know there's a dead Robin, and that's it.
And the grotto is an interesting one as well. Although, sorry, just very quickly, with that, we were talking about that reveal of Calderon being evil, per se, and we then find out in a later reveal he's not. But when he does that first reveal and someone says, there's a bomb and we've got it covered, he gives the first perfect, where he says perfect in a way that suggests at the time to us, oh, he's happy and this is all grand and part of his plan. But later, when he's undercover and we know he's a goodie pretending to be a baddie, and when Artemis is undercover and we know she's a goodie pretending to be a baddie, every time some baddie makes their life more difficult, they always say perfect.
Yep.
They always say it without sarcasm, and they're always totally sarcastic and have to change their plan to accommodate it.
Yep.
And I thought going back and re-watching this episode and seeing that reaction, and then that they sort of call back to that reaction later on, really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
When he finds out that there's that bomb and goes perfect.
Of course, the magical moment, which I get Carrie Payton on the show to talk about Aqualad, I want to know, like, did he know the entire season? Because, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they read the whole season, because when you rewatch that scene and he says perfect, you can almost, I don't know if I'm doing it myself, but you can almost read his, like, subtle pause, and like, you hear it differently when you go back and listen again, right? It's not perfect, as in, yes, it's perfect. Oh my God. Right?
Yeah. Now I have to try and save all my friends from this bomb. And then the way he does that is fantastic and different and interesting. And
the moment where, like, Nightwing and Aqualad are in the bottom of that cave where the bomb is, and Aqualad says, is it just you and me, old friend, or something like that? Like, he's finding out if he can talk, right?
Yeah. And then Superboy comes down and it's not. And then the way he's like, now I'm going to have to pretend to grandstand while warning you about this bomb.
Right. Time to monologue.
Yeah.
Time to become a supervillain and monologue. In rewatching it, it answers so many other questions as well. Sorry, I think I may have derailed you, though. So
not a problem.
Yeah. So you were talking about, like, the question of who's Beast Boy. So did you...
Oh, well, just before Beast Boy, we were about to talk about the Grotto.
Oh,
which is an interesting one to me. Because we were talking about this death of this middle Robin that we don't know about. And certainly I knew that there were a number of Robins because, and that one of them becomes Nightwing, because I have tangential understanding of this sort of thing. There was a fan TV series made about Nightwing years ago on Kickstarter, and I might have backed it. But it was a lot of campy fun. But in the Grotto, we've discovered, oh, you dare question me, you've let Tula die. And now we then see not just that Tula died, because you're like, well, okay, how did Tula die then? This is more questions. Why did they let Tula die? Does that mean she was part of the team? And we discover in the Grotto, she was part of the team. She was Aquagirl. She was part of the team. She was at some point leaving Atlantis to join the group. And this is an interesting one because, again, like Beast Boy and like you get these smaller, big to the character emotional pain that is just left in smaller moments in the background, kind of puts it in our psyche without beating us over the head.
Yes.
And I think that's fantastic. The fact that when they're in the grotto in episode 8 and they're in the cave with the holograms and they're standing in front of Artemis and they're talking about her being dead and they're all in mourning and there's a blue guy that no one recognizes off to the right that we get a bit more context on a few moments later. But in the background of almost every shot, like when people move, the camera moves with them in such a way that Tula is in the background. Like, they'll push each other and they'll step off to the side and the camera will move so she stays in the background, right there, in the center of the frame almost.
Right, right.
Always just there.
Interesting.
And so while she's not a main part of the story, they keep reminding you, this has happened. This character that you met and you know is important. We saw how important she was in season 1 to a number of our main characters, but especially to Cal. And, and is a further reminder of his pain and Garth's pain and Aquaman's pain. And because they're reacting to Cal's actions in that scene, they're seeing Artemis and they're talking about how could he have done this to Artemis. And we are getting this reminder that right there in the background is how he could have done this to Artemis. Just ever present, hanging over everything and not referenced.
Absolutely.
And she was definitely part of why he agreed to be so reckless and go deep undercover.
Yeah, absolutely. And we haven't gotten into reviewing any of season 2 yet, but these are the same kinds of things that we talk about, the things that get dropped in the background. So these are visual cues, but a lot of the examples I put in here were things that people had said. Like for Artemis in Bereft, where they all lost 6 months of their memory, and Kid Flash is like, you got a Green Arrow thing? Or like, what's going on with this costume? She's like, oh, Dad probably put me up to it. And he's like, well, why is that? He's like, oh, he probably wanted me to kill you. And then like a bomb goes off, or like the tank blows up the building they're in, and you're like, what did she just say?
And the way she said it as well, so matter of fact, like, well, I guess I'm supposed to kill you or something.
Yeah, she's like, oh, he probably wanted me to probably wanted me to kill you, the jerk. It makes you, again, ask those questions of who they are. But it gets even subtler than that. The idea that Superboy in that very first episode saying, Superman can fly. Why can't I fly? And then it doesn't come up. The general idea that he's less powerful than Superman comes up as a general plot point or general motivation, but not specific. Like, we specifically get an answer to why he can't do this, as opposed to just hand waving it. Oh, clones are less powerful.
But also, we get it episodes and episodes down the road.
Exactly.
So it's a throwaway. It's not a throwaway line, but it's a line that tells us something about his character that we as the audience and he as a character don't get a resolution for literal months. It feels like.
Yeah, absolutely. And this idea that with an ensemble cast in particular, the idea that they can literally like shuffle these little character development points and little handholds for us throughout a bunch of episodes. It's important because with an ensemble cast, you have so many characters. It's nice to spend, an episode focusing on a character, Cold Hearted for Kid Flash or whatever performance, really kind of focusing on a lot of Robin, even though other characters are in it. Like, you get these character-focused episodes, but really every episode has little bits and pieces, but you have to understand every character that's in a scene and make choices as to who's going to be in a scene in which to reveal these pieces of information as it goes along. And that takes so much planning, right?
And I also find it's interesting that you get these ideas of the things they reveal and when they reveal them. Sometimes it's an emotional impact for the characters, but not for us. And I've, or at least muted for us. And I don't know that I've come across a TV show that does that allows the characters to have a moment that you're maybe privy to, but isn't played for you.
Interesting.
So, for instance, the death of Artemis was played for us. The characters, a lot of them had, were in on the secret. A number of them weren't. So when they're in mourning, we're in mourning, then we get the reveal. But it was emotionally played for us, the viewers. We were there with them, feeling what they were feeling.
Yeah.
The next big question that I had at the start of season 2 after this time jump, which is, who is Beast Boy? What's going on there? When that gets played out, the emotional journey that they're going on is one that A, they've had before, B, we're not really privy to. It takes about a minute for them to get through it. And then you have to unpack it yourself, but the TV show has moved on.
Yeah.
So it's a moment for the characters, not for you. And you then have to almost make a, not conscious effort, but you then extrapolate out from that the emotions. Like,
the scene you're talking about is the scene on Ran, when Beast Boy sees a lake and a waterfall that looks exactly like the one in which his mother died.
It's, in Earthlings near the end.
That was brutal.
So throughout that whole episode, you're getting, and again, you're wondering who Beast Boy is, and you're getting, hello sister, hello brother, here I am in Camp Granada. And then just before the revelation, just before the revelation, she hugs him and we get a quick reference to blood transfusion, which I missed because I was overthinking the whole sister-brother thing and going, oh, is he another Martian that's come down and now he's doing this other thing? What's going on there? And I missed the obvious. But you then go, wait, when she says you'll get, he says, what power will I get? And she says, you'll get the power to listen to your adoptive sister. You're like, okay, adoptive. So why did she adopt him? Because I'm so slow on the uptake. And if you're paying attention in the episode in season 1, Image, and I wasn't, again, she's talking about being a part of the family. Like Marie tells her she's part of the family.
Yep.
Garfield himself calls himself her blood brother. And so these one-off lines in Image about family, to me, at the time, meant, she wants acceptance, she wants a family, she's scared of losing all these people and losing all that because of her white Martianness. And she even says, and you played me an AMV this morning as I was trying to make coffee, where they take that line of her saying, you are my family, to the group. And certainly in Image, that's what I took from it, of you are my family, this group is my family. Not even thinking, of course she's going to accept that throwaway line from Marie about you're part of the family now. And of course it's going to mean so much more to her than they would ever know. And you're just, all of this is after realization after the fact, is I got none of it until Beast Boy's face changed. Yeah. And that's when it clicked into place.
That's so interesting for me to hear from somebody who maybe didn't have a history with these characters before, because as soon as of course, Image, like we're watching it, I was like, Garfield Logan. Oh, it's Beast Boy, right? They got Changeling in this. That's interesting. He's really young. And as they went through it, and then, of course, they completely changed his origin for Young Justice in getting this blood, because Miss Martian's not as old as him as a character. They did this blood transfusion, and I'm like, oh my God, he is literally a green shape-changing superhero. Whoa. Like they did this brilliant way of folding his origin into what makes sense for the story in here, and then carried it through into the next season.
And they do it in such a fantastic way. Talking about subtle things, that's a setup and a payoff that I never would have realized, that you're there with it all the way back from Image. Whereas I had no knowledge of this now until we get to the waterfall and the image of the car. Yeah. And that's all they give you. And yet you know what happened to his mother. You know straight away, before she even mentions Queen Bee, why he's now with Megan. And you see, interestingly, it then puts into context everything I saw in the previous episode and in that episode, where in the face of all this insanity and danger, he's just this bubbly, effervescent thing. And it's like a parallel with Robin from season 1, like in Homefront, where he's being chipper and he gets called on it by Artemis. Because it's that coping mechanism to what is basically PTSD almost, or certainly post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
And so you've got Miss Martian, having caused these mutations, feeling guilt over not being able to save his mother and feeling like his family for so many reasons. And here he's got those same coping mechanisms. And it's functioning, you see it functioning, you see him functioning right up until this waterfall. And the fact that it's a waterfall on an alien planet is irrelevant, because the second he gets to that waterfall, all of this carefully crafted, bubbly lightness fades away. And his mask that he wears, the fact that his face is literally completely different from that of the face he used to have, that he's hiding his face, he's hiding his real self from the world and protecting himself and building up these layers of armor of fakeness with the sideburns and all the rest of it. And that whole thing is just stripped away by a waterfall. And it all unfolds in a minute. And that's it. Yeah. From the 15-minute mark to the 16-minute mark, you get all of this just exploding in this giant unpacking box in your head. I had to pause Netflix and go for a walk. Because you get the answer, and you didn't realize you didn't really want the answer to who Beast Boy was, and to see it told in this way where he freezes, and it is post-traumatic stress. Whether it's full-on disorder or not, it is post-traumatic stress. And the complete shutting down, and you extrapolate from that the idea of these are young people in a war zone, or not necessarily in war zones, but in war-torn countries and in fights and battles, being affected, and how crippling that can be. And the fact that it's not only soldiers that have to deal with this kind of thing, but it's kids, whether they're in the fight or not.
Yeah.
And the fact that his post-traumatic stress comes from before he joined the fight and was the cause for him to join the fight.
Yeah.
But it wasn't during fighting, as we so often see with, soldiers as a fighting causes it. No, it's just being in these situations. And that McGann then has to go into his mind to get him back.
Conclude Part 1. Part 2, T-minus 7 days.
You've been listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files podcast. Our hosts are Rich Howard and Emily Booza. Our editor and producer is Neil Powell. Our theme was composed by Emily Mio. Our logo was created by Kevin Bates. Whelmed is a fan-made podcast and is not officially affiliated with DC Comics, DC Entertainment, Warner Brothers Animation, and any other owners of Young Justice or its related source material. As such, these companies have sole ownership of all symbols, images, names, logos, and proprietary material related to Young Justice. Original content of this podcast is ours under Creative Commons. Thanks for listening, and stay whelmed.